Well, hello. Um, I've wanted to make a video on multiculturalism for quite some time, ever since I started my master's program in mental health counseling. And I was just reading a chapter from one of the books for my practicum class, and I thought maybe it would be a good sort of starting point for a video on multicultural issues in counseling, so to speak. So I'd like to read this article first. It's called "Can I Trust What I See?" So here it goes. James Harris, an African-American professor of education, and I were invited by a national Native American youth leadership organization to give talks in Oklahoma. I attended Dr. Harris's first lecture with about 60 Native American children. Dynamic and humorous, Dr. Harris touched the heartstrings of everyone. But much to my surprise, when the lecture was over, he was very upset. "A complete failure," he said to me with a long face. "They're not interested." "No," I replied, "it was a great success. Don't you see how people loved your lecture?" "No, not at all." After some deliberation, I came to see why he could have such an erroneous impression. "There were not very many facial expressions," Professor Harris said. I said, "You may be right, using African American standards. However, that is not a sign that your audience was not interested. Native American people, in a way, are programmed to restrain their feelings, whether positive or negative, in public. As a result, their facial expressions would be hard to detect. Native American people have always valued restraint of emotion, considering this a sign of maturity and wisdom, as I know. Actually, in terms of emotional expressiveness, African American culture and Native American culture may represent two extremes on a continuum. They did not ask me a single question, though I repeatedly asked them to," he said. I replied, "Well, they didn't because they respect you." "Come on, you're kidding me." I told him, "Many Native Americans are not accustomed to asking questions in public, probably for the following reasons. A. If you ask an intelligent question, you will draw attention away from the teacher and onto yourself. That is not an act of modesty and may be seen as showing off. B. If your question is silly, you will be seen as a laughingstock and lose face. C. Whether your question is good or bad, one thing is certain. You will disturb the instructor's teaching plan, or you may suggest the teacher is unclear. That goes against the Native American tradition of being respectful to the senior. So you can never expect a Native American audience to be as active as African Americans or whites in asking questions. In today's situation, some kids probably did want to ask you questions, for you repeatedly asked them to raise questions and issues, but unfortunately they still couldn't do it. He asked why. I said, "You waited only a few seconds for questions before you went on lecturing, which is far from enough. With Native Americans, you have to adopt a longer time frame. European Americans and African Americans may ask questions as soon as you invite them to. American Indians may wait for about 20 or 30 seconds to start to do so. That period of silence is a necessity for them. You might say that Native Americans are true believers in the saying, 'Speech is silver, silence is golden.'" He asked, "Well, why didn't you tell me that on the spot then?" If it is respectful for those Native If it is respectful for those Native American kids not to ask you questions, Dr. Harris, I said, how could you expect this humble Chinese to be so disrespectful as to come to the stage to correct you? So the article is written by a Chinese person, or a Chinese American, I guess. So the article finishes with this. The director of the Native American organization, who overheard my conversation with James Harris, approached me with the question, how do you possibly know all this about us Native Americans? Well, I don't think it is news for you that Native Americans migrated from Asia some thousands of years ago. You don't mind that your Asian cousins still share your ethnic traits, do you? The three of us all laughed. So, I think this is a very interesting article. I mean, I don't have any problems with the fact that generally people from different cultures may have different like communication styles, different sort of like social traits, etc. I mean, but it doesn't mean that while discussing those traits, like let's say Native American culture, in Native American culture, sort of people, consider it as a sign of disrespect to ask somebody questions if that person is not being clear, right? Because they may fear that that person will feel like he's being disrespected, or that asking questions may show that person that he may possibly be somehow unclear. Like, that's a really bad thing. So, if there is a trait like this in a culture, well, we can still ask why. Why do people in that culture have that trait, right? So, the reasons that the author gives in this article, like, it's not considered an act of modesty, or you may be you may be seen as a laughing stock and loose face, or that you may suggest that the teacher is unclear. Like, why do people think like that? We can still ask that question, because we know that people from, it doesn't matter what race the person is, it doesn't matter what culture the person is, ethnicity, it doesn't matter, they still are born just a person. So we know that, let's say, if we take a Chinese baby at birth, well, provided that like his mom wasn't battered, when he was in utero or she was in utero, provided absence of any prenatal considerable trauma, we know that if we take that baby at birth and place it like with, an English family, that baby, as he grows up, he'll be very, he'll share all of the traits of just English people, right? Because he'll be acculturated into that culture from birth. I mean, with a Chinese person, it may be a little bit more complex, because there'll be the let's say the appearance that will sort of show that he is originally from Asia. But let's take maybe an Eastern European baby, right? And I mean, of course, Eastern Europe culturally is very different from Western Europe, and so if we take like a child from Ukraine, and at birth, and give it, and he gets adopted into an English family, I mean, nobody will know ever that he's from Ukraine, or that he was adopted. Again, provided there was no like trauma, significant trauma before he was adopted, and before he was born. So we can ask, okay, so what happens from the moment that the child is born in this Native American culture? I mean, not to be picking on Native Americans, but just sort of like, this is what they're talking about in this article. So what happens to that baby that is born in like, a Native American tribe, in a Native American reservation, that he grows up to be so, we could say, so cautious around doing anything to like suggest that the authority may be somehow unclear, not even wrong, but like even unclear, like not ideal in some way. Well, that's a very interesting question. Like, what happens? Well, one thing, let's say, that we can hypothesize that can potentially happen. So like, let's say if I see an oven, like somebody's cooking something like on an electric stove, let's say, I'm not gonna like put my hand on the stove because I've done that already and it hurt, right? And so I've learned not to do that. And so I haven't been doing that all my life. And if these kids are so, well, cautious, but I mean it is fearful. I mean, it just looks like just fear, right? Why are they so, well, let's use cautious around saying anything that may somehow potentially suggest that the authority may be unclear, right? And, if they ask a question which other people may think is silly, like, what does it mean? Like, he asks a question, whoever is asking a question is asking that question because they don't understand something. But other people won't respect that, right, in the culture. They'll just think it's silly, and they'll, humiliate or denigrate or laugh at him, tease him, etc. Right? So why do people do that? What happens to them since they were born until they are whatever age they're at right now, that there is this sort of approach both to authority, to asking questions, basically to critical thinking and stuff like that? Well, I think an argument can be made, and the theory wouldn't be, a hypothesis wouldn't be out of the question, that these kids were humiliated and attacked for asking questions or questioning authority in any way. Right? And this is very different at this point, because if we say, okay, this person is very cautious around authority and is very cautious around, well, fearful around asking questions because he's a Native American. If we take this approach, I mean, nobody has any responsibility, it's just he's a Native American, that's why he's like that, just because it's his culture. And that's quite a different way of approaching things, rather than to say, okay, he's fearful around authority and around critical thinking, and basically around speaking his mind and being himself, because he was attacked by his community, by his parents, by his teachers and priests or shamans. I don't know who exactly it is in the Native American culture, but like the religious sort of community leaders. So he was attacked by those authority figures, and that, I mean, that may be like he got beaten for it. It's definitely not unheard of, but maybe he got yelled at it. And even like for kids, let's say, if their parent like looks at them, like gives them like a humiliating look, or like gives them like a diminishing look, for kids it's very visceral. The experience is very visceral, the experience of being disapproved by an authority figure is very visceral because, you know, you need these people to take care of you when you're a kid, because otherwise you die. So anytime the authority figure disapproves of you when you're like a little kid, for you it evokes a very strong sense of fear, and you have like an almost, I don't know if it's almost, but I think it's like you get this impetus that's, I would think, impossible to overcome, you know, to completely obey that authority. You know, so authority beats you up or denigrates you in some other way, or humiliates you or diminishes you for doing something, then you'll do your best to not do that again, just because you want that authority to be there for you, to take care of you, because, you know, you're a helpless child. So I think an argument can be made that these Native American children are so afraid of speaking their mind or asking clarifications from the authority, or being ridiculed from the side of their peers, because this is the treatment they received from their parents, priests, teachers, etc. And then from peers, of course, because kids learn by modeling mostly. They just sort of see what their elders do, you know, what their parents do, other authority figures do, and they take over those communication styles, or, you know, just ways about building or going about relationships. So if the child is being denigrated by his authority figures for asking questions, that child will do the same to other children, you know, usually younger. So that's how these things sort of come about. And this issue of responsibility, I think, is crucial, because if we say it's just somebody's culture, well, then nobody bears any sort of responsibility, like for how this person was treated, and then this person sort of like it devoids him or her of responsibility to a large extent, because they can just say, oh, you know, it's my culture, you know, sort of, my mom yelled at me, I'm gonna yell at my kids, you know, just my culture. But now if we say, hey, you know, you're afraid of asking questions because your authority figures humiliated, beat you up, yelled at you because when you asked questions as a child, then the responsibility is very clear, because we understand that if that person didn't get these absolutely negative and horrendous consequences for speaking his mind or being curious, being inquisitive, that's the way children naturally are. If that wasn't punished out of him, he would still have those traits. Just generally, this class that this book is for, well, actually, no, this book is for a different class. This is for actually my practicum class. But we have a whole class that is sort of like dedicated to diversity or multicultural issues in counseling situations. That class sort of, to a large extent, takes this approach that, you know, it's just somebody's culture, and, you know, the differences between cultures can be so big that, you know, black can be white, up can be down, violence can be good for children in one culture, while violence is bad for children in other cultures, and all of that sort of thing, which is, of course, I would say very nearsighted and completely unempathetic towards children, and can be used as justification for abuse, right? because we can just say, oh, it's just their culture, that's what they do to their kids or to their wives, or, you know, whatever. So, I mean, I'm totally on board with, you know, you cannot sort of discriminate against people, or like take away from people's rights based on their, you know, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, and other sort of aesthetic things like that. I mean, I'm totally on board with that. I mean, everybody is the same. At least at birth, right? I mean, then of course they're born into a specific sort of set of circumstances, but those circumstances can be better or worse. They're not just different, like, you know, like different colors, or like, you know, some people like vanilla ice cream, some people like chocolate ice cream, you know, those are different, but they are sort of like the same. Now, cultures are different, but some are worse and some are better. And I would argue that how we know which culture is worse and how we know which culture is better is to which degree people can sort of like permeate violence, or inflict, to which violence permeates the society. And to be more precise, to which degree people inflict violence on their children. Violence and also like other forms of abuse or denigration or humiliation. And I think this is very important, because if we don't understand that, it doesn't matter which race the person is, which ethnicity the person is, which language they speak, it's still very hurtful, and it's still a tragedy when they're being, like, let's say, beaten up or denigrated or yelled at. For any person it's a tragedy. For any person it's a humiliation. And it's 1,000-fold more strong or potent or destructive humiliation if you are in a helpless position, like a child.